The sanctuary was so quiet, I could hear someone turning the pages of a Bible 3 rows behind me. My mother stepped away from her seat before the pastor could continue the announcements. "I need to say something," she said, facing the congregation instead of the pulpit. My stomach tightened. This was supposed to be the Sunday my parents blessed my upcoming marriage. Instead, she looked directly at me. "I cannot celebrate my daughter's decision to marry a divorced man," she said, her voice calm enough to make every word feel deliberate. "A marriage that begins by accepting another woman's former husband is not the future we prayed for." Whispers rippled through the church. People who had smiled at me only minutes earlier slowly turned in my direction. Then my father stood beside her. "Your mother and I will not be attending the wedding." No anger. No shouting. Just a quiet declaration that somehow hurt even more. I couldn't move. My fiancé wasn't inside to hear any of it. He was waiting outside with his 7-year-old son, believing this would be an ordinary Sunday before our wedding. As I stared at my parents, one question kept echoing through my mind. How had the people who taught me that grace mattered become the first ones to deny it? The service ended in uncomfortable silence. No one approached me the way they normally did. People who usually stopped to ask about work or wedding plans suddenly found something else to look at. A few offered sympathetic smiles before quickly walking away. Others whispered together, pretending not to notice I could hear fragments of their conversation. "Maybe her parents know something. He's divorced for a reason. It's sad she's settling." Every sentence landed harder than the one before. Outside, Ethan was helping his son, Noah, straighten the little clip-on tie he insisted on wearing to church. "There she is," Ethan said with an easy smile. "Everything okay?" I forced one back. "Yeah, just a longer service than usual." He studied my face for a second, but glanced at Noah before asking anything else. Instead, he reached for my hand. "We'll talk later." We started toward the parking lot together. That's when I noticed several church members staring openly at Ethan, instead of pretending not to. One woman pulled her grandson a little closer as they passed us. Another couple abruptly stopped talking the moment we came within earshot. Noah looked up at me. Did I spill something on my shirt? My heart broke. "No, sweetheart." An elderly church member named Mr. Collins slowly approached us. He had known my family for decades and rarely involved himself in other people's disagreements. He shook Ethan's hand firmly. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Ethan frowned. "For what?" Mr. Collins looked toward the church doors, where my parents were surrounded by supportive friends. Then he lowered his voice. "I just wish people knew the whole story." Before Ethan could respond, Mr. Collins walked away. I watched him disappear across the parking lot, then turned back toward Ethan. He looked confused. I looked at the church behind us. Then I whispered the question I couldn't stop asking myself. What story does everyone think they know? The drive home was almost silent. Noah hummed softly in the back seat while looking out the window, completely unaware of what had happened inside the sanctuary. Ethan kept both hands on the steering wheel, glancing at me every few minutes. Finally, after Noah had gone inside to feed the dog, Ethan turned to me. "What happened in there?" I looked down at my engagement ring. My mom stood up in front of everyone. His expression changed immediately. "What did she say?" I swallowed. "She told the church she couldn't support our marriage because you're divorced. Then Dad stood beside her and announced they aren't coming to the wedding." For several seconds, Ethan didn't speak. Instead, he leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The apology stunned me. "Why are you apologizing?" "Because my past just became your burden." "No," I said firmly. "Their decision became my burden." That evening, I drove to my parents' house without calling first. My mother opened the door as though she had been expecting me. If you're here to thank us later, you'll understand why we did this. I stepped inside. You humiliated me. We protected you. You embarrassed Ethan in front of the entire church. I embarrassed no one, Diane replied evenly. I simply refuse to pretend that marrying a divorced man is the same as marrying someone without that history. Before I could answer, my father walked into the room. Your mother is right. I looked from one to the other. So that's it, public humiliation instead of a conversation. Harold folded his arms. We've had conversations. You've given opinions. We've given warnings. My mother took a slow breath. You still have time to cancel this wedding. I'm not canceling it. You don't know what life with that kind of baggage becomes. I stared at her. Ethan isn't baggage. He always will be, she answered quietly. Once a marriage breaks, the damage follows forever. The words hung in the room. I couldn't believe the woman who had taught Sunday school for 20 years was speaking about another human being, as though he could never be redeemed. Dad stepped closer. You've noticed it already. Noticed what? Your relatives agree with us. I frowned. What are you talking about? I've spoken with your uncles, your aunts, your grandparents. Every important person in this family believes you're making a mistake. The realization hit me all at once. This wasn't just about refusing to attend. They had been building support against us. You've been calling everyone. We're trying to save you. No, I replied. You're trying to control me. Neither of them answered. Their silence said enough. When I returned home, Ethan was reading with Noah on the couch. The little boy smiled the moment he saw me. We're reading the dinosaur book again. Ethan looked up. Everything okay? I hesitated before nodding. Can we talk after Noah goes to bed? That night, after Noah was asleep, I told Ethan everything, including my father's claim that nearly everyone in the family supported them. Ethan listened without interrupting. When I finished, I asked the question that had been bothering me all day. Why won't you tell people what really happened with your marriage? He looked toward Noah's bedroom before answering. Because it isn't only my story. They're destroying your reputation. I know. They're making everyone believe you abandoned your family. I know. Then why stay silent? He rubbed his hands together before speaking. My son was 4 years old when everything fell apart. One day he'll ask questions. I don't want him finding strangers arguing about his mother online or hearing adults repeat the worst moments of her life. So you'll let people judge you instead. If someone has to carry that weight, it should be me. His answer left me speechless. The next morning, I overheard Noah talking to himself while coloring at the kitchen table. He didn't know I was standing in the hallway. If Mommy hadn't left. His voice became quieter. Maybe everybody would like Daddy. My chest tightened. Ethan walked into the kitchen carrying cereal. Noah looked up. Daddy. Yeah, buddy. Was the divorce because I wasn't good enough? Ethan froze. Then he immediately knelt beside him. No. But Grandma Carter doesn't want us. This isn't your fault. Did I make Mommy leave? Ethan gently placed both hands on Noah's shoulders. You didn't make anyone leave. Adults make adult decisions. None of them were because of you. Noah nodded slowly, but his eyes weren't convinced. He climbed off his chair and quietly walked to his room. That was the moment I understood something I hadn't fully seen before. My parents weren't just rejecting Ethan. A 7-year-old boy had started believing he was the reason people didn't want his family. That night, as I tucked Noah into bed, he looked at me with hesitant eyes. Can I ask you something? Of course. He held onto his blanket for a moment before whispering. Do you think your parents will ever want me? 3 days after the confrontation at my parents' house, we mailed the last of our wedding invitations. For one evening, I let myself believe the hardest part was behind us. Then the phone started ringing. "I'm so sorry," my cousin Melissa said. "We won't be able to make it." "I thought you already RSVP'd." "We did." She hesitated. "Something changed." "What changed?" Another long silence. "I don't want to get in the middle of this." The call ended before she explained. By the end of the week, 4 more guests had declined. Every conversation sounded strangely similar. No one accused Ethan directly. No one admitted why they were backing out. But every excuse felt rehearsed. At Wednesday night's church fellowship, the answers finally found me. I walked into the fellowship hall carrying a tray of desserts I'd promised to bring. The conversations stopped. Not gradually. All at once. A few people smiled awkwardly. Others looked down at their coffee cups. I spotted my mother speaking with 2 women near the refreshment table. As I stepped closer, I heard her say, "I'll always love my daughter. That's why I can't pretend this marriage is wise." One of the women nodded sympathetically. "It must be heartbreaking." "It is," my mother replied, "but enabling a mistake isn't love." I stopped behind them. "So you've been telling everyone that now?" The 3 women turned. My mother's expression didn't change. "I've been answering questions honestly." "You've been answering questions you created." The room grew quiet enough that nearby conversations faded. She folded her hands. "People asked why we weren't attending. And you decided to put Ethan on trial." I told them exactly why. "You told them your version." "My version is the truth." I looked around the room. People were watching openly now. No one interrupted. No one defended either of us. One of the church couples who had agreed months earlier to do a scripture reading at the ceremony slowly approached. The husband cleared his throat. "Leslie, we've decided someone else should handle the reading." I stared at him. "Because of my fiancé." His wife answered quietly. "We don't want to become part of a situation that's causing so much division." They walked away before I could respond. My mother watched them leave without saying a word. The damage was spreading exactly as she'd intended. Later that evening, I stepped outside for air. 2 men from the congregation stood near the parking lot. They didn't realize I was close enough to hear. I heard the guy walked out on his first family. That's what people are saying. I feel bad for Leslie. So do I. I wanted to interrupt. To tell them none of it was true. But I couldn't. Because Ethan had never told anyone the full story. By staying silent, he'd allowed rumors to become facts in other people's minds. The next morning, my aunt accidentally revealed what had been happening behind the scenes. I wasn't supposed to mention it, she admitted over the phone. "Mention what?" "Your mother called almost everyone in the family." My grip tightened around the phone. "What did she say?" "She asked us not to attend unless Ethan called off the wedding." I closed my eyes. "So she organized this. She believes she's protecting you." "No," I whispered. "She's trying to isolate me." That afternoon, Harold asked Ethan to meet him at a small coffee shop across town. When Ethan came home, I could immediately tell something had happened. "What did my dad say?" He slowly took off his jacket. He wasn't angry. That surprised me. He was certain. Certain of what? He said if I really loved you, I'd let you go. I stared at him. He actually said that. Ethan nodded. He told me marrying you would cost you your parents, your church family, and probably half your relatives. What did you say? I asked him one question. What? If your daughter marries me, will you stop loving her? I held my breath. He didn't answer. That silence hurt more than any argument could have. 2 days later, I stayed behind after a volunteer meeting to stack chairs. An elderly church elder named Mr. Raymond approached quietly. I've been wanting to speak with you. I smiled politely. About the wedding. He nodded. I knew Ethan years ago. I stopped working. You did. I watched him bring that little boy to church every Sunday. He rested both hands on the back of a chair. There were mornings when he looked exhausted enough to fall asleep standing up. I listened without interrupting. He never complained. Mr. Raymond shook his head slowly. I don't know everything that happened in his marriage, and it's not my place to tell you, but I know this. He looked directly at me. I've seen many fathers. And I've rarely seen one carry as much responsibility as that young man did. Before I could ask another question, he gently smiled. The truth has a way of surviving longer than gossip. Then he walked away. That evening, I told Ethan about the conversation. He smiled faintly. Mr. Raymond always noticed more than people realized. Despite everything we'd lost, one thing became clear. Neither of us wanted fear to make our decisions. If half the seats are empty, I said, we'll still get married. Ethan reached for my hand. If it's only us and Noah, it'll still be enough. The next afternoon, we gathered in the church for the wedding rehearsal. Everyone practiced walking down the aisle. When it was Noah's turn, he hesitated. He looked up at Ethan. Dad. Yeah, buddy. I want to carry something tomorrow. What do you mean? A sign. Leslie and I exchanged puzzled glances. What kind of sign? I asked gently. Noah smiled to himself, clutching a folded piece of paper against his chest. You'll see tomorrow. Before either of us could ask another question, he tucked it behind his back and ran down the aisle. Neither of us had any idea what he'd written. The wedding morning arrived with a kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful. It felt uncertain. The church looked exactly as it always had, the stained glass windows glowing in the morning light, fresh flowers lining the aisle, soft music drifting through the sanctuary. But every smile seemed restrained. Every conversation ended the moment someone noticed me walking by. Inside the bridal room, my maid of honor adjusted my veil. You look beautiful. I smiled. Thank you. She hesitated before speaking again. I checked the seating chart one last time. I already knew what she was about to say. My parents' seats are still empty. She nodded. I kept hoping they'd call. So did I. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The two front row seats reserved for Diane and Harold Carter remained untouched. Their names were still printed on the white cards. I refused to remove them. Not because I expected them to come. Because I wanted them to know there had always been a place for them. Across the hallway, Ethan was helping Noah button his tiny suit jacket. You nervous? Ethan asked. A little. So am I. Noah grinned. You're the grown-up. I know. So you're supposed to be brave. Ethan laughed softly. I'll do my best. A volunteer knocked gently on the door. 5 minutes. As soon as she left, Ethan's smile faded. He looked toward the sanctuary. Then back at me. Can we talk? I stepped into the hallway with him. He took a slow breath. If you want to postpone this. I stared at him. What? You deserve a wedding where your family celebrates you. I have that. He shook his head. No, you don't. My parents made their choice. They shouldn't have had to. His voice was quiet. I don't want the first day of our marriage to become the day your family fell apart. I reached for both of his hands. My family didn't fall apart today. He looked confused. It started falling apart the moment love became conditional. His eyes filled. I'm choosing the family we're building, not the one that keeps asking me to earn its approval. He nodded slowly. Then he smiled for the first time that morning. Okay. We're getting married. "We're getting married." A few minutes later, guests began taking their seats. Some pews looked fuller than I'd expected. Others had obvious gaps where relatives should have been sitting. People glanced toward the empty front row chairs. The absence spoke louder than words. Near the entrance, one of Ethan's longtime friends quietly raised his phone. "Mind if I record the ceremony?" he asked another guest. "They'll probably want to watch it later." No one thought much about it. It seemed like an ordinary request. Meanwhile, Noah sat on a bench in the hallway, carefully smoothing out a folded piece of white poster board. He checked the words one last time, then folded it shut again. A bridesmaid noticed. "What are you hiding?" He smiled. "It's a surprise. For your dad." He shook his head. "For Leslie." Before she could ask another question, he hugged the sign against his chest. The wedding coordinator called everyone into position. Music began drifting through the sanctuary. Guests stood. The doors remained closed. 1 minute passed. Then another. A nervous murmur spread across the room. Someone whispered, "Do you think they'll actually go through with it?" Just as the processional was about to begin, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the church slowly opened. Every head turned. My mother walked in first. My father followed beside her. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them approached the reserved seats waiting in the front row. Instead, they quietly stood against the back wall. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the pastor glanced toward them before looking back at the wedding party. I saw them from where I stood with my father absent from my side. For a split second, I wondered if they had come to stop the ceremony, or if they had simply come to watch from a distance. I couldn't tell. The music continued. The coordinator gave Noah a small nod. "It's your turn." He took a deep breath. Holding the folded sign carefully against his chest, the 7-year-old stepped through the open doors and began walking slowly down the aisle. No one yet knew what was written on it. The church grew so quiet that the only sound was Noah's small dress shoes tapping gently against the wooden floor. Every pair of eyes followed him. He smiled nervously as he walked, holding the folded white sign against his chest with both hands. Halfway down the aisle, he stopped exactly where Ethan had told him to. He looked toward me. Then he carefully unfolded the sign. Large black letters filled the page. "You didn't have to become my mom, but you chose me anyway. Thank you for making us a family." For several seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. A woman near the front covered her mouth. Someone behind her quietly began crying. I couldn't see the words anymore because my eyes had filled with tears. Ethan lowered his head, pressing a trembling hand against his face. He had always believed he could protect Noah by carrying every misunderstanding alone. Instead, his son had said more in one sentence than any explanation ever could. Noah looked up at me anxiously. Did I do okay? I laughed through my tears. You did perfectly. I walked forward before the ceremony officially began, knelt in front of him, and wrapped my arms around him. You've made me the happiest woman in this room. He hugged me tightly. I really wanted you to know. I know. Behind us, sniffles echoed throughout the sanctuary. The pastor waited quietly, allowing the moment to unfold without interruption. Then he stepped forward. There are moments, he said gently, when a child reminds adults what faith actually looks like. His words settled over the congregation. Grace isn't earned by having a perfect past. Compassion isn't reserved for people who have never made it through hardship. Today, we're not simply witnessing a marriage. We're witnessing a family choosing one another. The room remained silent. Not the uncomfortable silence from the Sunday my parents had humiliated me. This silence was different. It invited people to reflect instead of judge. The pastor nodded toward Ethan. If there's anything you'd like to say before we continue, you're welcome to. Ethan hesitated. He had spent years refusing to defend himself. Not because he was ashamed, because every explanation involved someone Noah still loved. He stepped beside me and took a slow breath. I've never talked publicly about my first marriage. His voice remained calm. I didn't stay silent because there was something to hide. He looked at Noah. I stayed silent because my son deserved to grow up without hearing strangers debate his mother's worst moments. Several guests lowered their eyes. My former wife struggled with addiction for years. I tried to help her. We tried counseling. We tried treatment. Eventually, she left. He paused. I never wanted people to remember her for that, and I never wanted Noah believing she was only the hardest chapter of our lives. He gently rested a hand on his son's shoulder. So I accepted that some people would misunderstand me. His voice grew softer. I could live with that. But I couldn't live with teaching my son that protecting someone else's dignity wasn't worth the cost. No one interrupted him. Not even my parents. For the first time since our engagement, they weren't looking at Ethan as a divorced man. They were looking at a father. My mother slowly raised a hand to her face. She wasn't hiding tears anymore. She was wiping them away. My father stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. The confidence that had carried him through weeks of public certainty had disappeared. When the pastor finally continued, there wasn't a trace of tension left in the room. I spoke my vows to Ethan. Then I turned toward Noah. I also have a promise to make. He looked up at me with wide eyes. I promise to show up for you on ordinary days, not just important ones. He smiled. I promise to listen before I assume. He nodded. And I promise that you'll never have to wonder whether you belong with me. His eyes filled with tears again. I know. The ceremony ended with applause that felt completely different from the polite applause I'd expected. People weren't celebrating because a wedding had finished. They were celebrating because something broken inside the room had finally begun to heal. As guests greeted us afterward, many apologized. One woman quietly admitted, I believed the rumors. Another said, I should have asked questions before choosing sides. Even the couple who had withdrawn from reading scripture embraced us. We're sorry, the husband said. We judged a story we never understood. Near the church entrance, I saw my parents standing alone. For the first time in weeks, they weren't surrounded by supporters. They looked uncertain. My mother slowly approached. She stopped a few feet away from Ethan. I owe you an apology. He simply listened. I reduced your entire life to one word. She looked at Noah. And I forgot there was a little boy listening to everything I said. Her voice broke. I'm so sorry. My father stepped forward. I thought I was protecting my daughter. He looked directly at me. But I was protecting my own pride. Neither apology erased what had happened. Neither one could give us back the weeks we'd lost. But they were honest. And honesty was where healing finally began. 2 days later, one of Ethan's friends called. You need to look online. We opened the video he'd recorded during the ceremony. It wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting. No confrontation. Just a little boy unfolding a handmade sign, followed by an entire church, realizing it had judged a family without knowing their story. People shared it because it reminded them how easily assumptions become convictions. Within 48 hours, more than 9 million people had watched it. Comments poured in from parents, stepfamilies, pastors, teachers, and adults who had once been children wondering if they belonged. The conversation wasn't about divorce. It was about compassion. Local media interviewed church leaders about extending grace instead of reinforcing stigma. The leadership met privately with my parents after members questioned how public condemnation had been allowed to replace private conversation. A few weeks later, during a Sunday service, my parents asked to speak. This time, there were no whispers, no anticipation, only quiet attention. My father looked across the sanctuary. We confused appearances with righteousness. My mother continued. We believed protecting tradition mattered more than protecting people. She turned toward Ethan, then toward me. We were wrong. There was no applause. There didn't need to be. An apology is most powerful when it isn't asking for recognition. It simply accepts responsibility. The months that followed weren't perfect. Trust returned slowly. Family dinners were awkward at first. Conversations were careful. Boundaries were respected. But something important had changed. No one expected love to come with conditions anymore. One afternoon, several months after the wedding, Noah ran across a park toward a group of children. Someone asked, "Is that your mom?" He smiled without hesitation. "Yep." He pointed toward me proudly. "She chose me." Later that evening, I walked past the hallway in our home. Framed on the wall was the handwritten sign from our wedding. Its edges were slightly worn. The marker had faded just a little, but the message hadn't lost any of its meaning. It reminded us every day that families aren't defined by perfect histories. They're built by people who choose each other, especially when it's hardest. The moment that changed 9 million minds wasn't a speech. It was 7 simple words from a child who finally believed he belonged.